Hello, and welcome to our next presentation. This is day 3 of the final day of the symposium. And on behalf of the MIT CDOIQ Virtual Symposium, we would like to thank all our sponsors who have sponsored the symposium this year. Please keep a lookout for a very special survey that we'll be sending out shortly. In the meantime, let me thank our sponsors, Deloitte Informatica, Privacy Analytics, CDOIQ, Fusion Alliance, KPMG, Santel Consultants, Tamer, Elation, Ali Data, Big ID, Boomi, Caserta, Citizen, Data Kitchen, Garage, Okira, Pylog, Click, ThoughtSpot, Eckerson, Global ID, Snowflake, and Starburst. Please take a chance to go to Content Hub, see what content they have, download that, and if you get a chance, reach out to our partners. Without our partners, we would not be able to hold a symposium. Thank you, and we look forward to seeing you in 2021.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our final session. This one is session 18B, and we have the pleasure of Myles Suer, the head of Global Enterprise Marketing for Boomi. Myles is going to be talking to us today about accelerating your data capabilities for organizational growth. Myles, over to you.
Glad to be with everyone today. Thrilled that we can talk about data and data capabilities and how you grow those. It's interesting. I facilitate something called the CIO chat, and we were just discussing about different aspects. And it was clear from the CIO's perspective that things like governance are areas to grow for in the future. So let's get on with it. So many of you have probably heard Tom talk at these events. He's written in Harvard Business Review about data defense and data offense. I just wanted to start there because I think it's a great place to look at where we're going. I'll talk a bit about making data discoverable. How do you get it to the point where data modelers are doing more, doing it earlier? How do we do self-service? And then I'll talk a little bit at the end, just briefly touch on how Boomi can help you both in your data defense and data offense strategies. But I'm going to focus on the front end here in terms of what you can do in terms of CDOs and key leaders for data in terms of driving your business results. For those who haven't seen this is Tom's view of data defense versus data offense. I noticed he came on one of these calls the other day, so if I get any questions from him, I'll let you know. So that'll be interesting. But basically, I think of data defense as everything to get yourself ready to go do interesting things with data. Obviously, data offense traditionally was about descriptive analytics, but we see more and more companies who are using predictive analytics and then driving action out of those results. And so we have a real potential there to transform the business. And we'll talk a little bit about some of the thinking that I've been picking up and reviewing in terms of what you can do from an offensive point of view. I think the sad news that Tom found, and hopefully it's a little bit better, I guess it's 3 years later now, is that a lot of the structured data isn't actually used in making decisions. Some of this is going to come by having a new breed of CEO happen. I really like the CEO that we have at Target, for example, who's so into data that he even does impromptu focus groups in order to understand what's the data really telling him, why are people saying what they're saying. But we still have a ways to go in terms of making the structured data useful. Obviously, there's a lot of work that needs to happen to make unstructured data analyzable and usable as you look at things. Sometimes it's tagging it with metadata. If we look at industrial data, there may be no metadata, so we have work to do there. Clearly, we need to make more access for employees. There's this whole concept of citizen data scientist and things like that. So we need more people to have access. And analysts, simply put, and I'll share another slide on this next, need to spend less time discovering and actually prepping data. This is a really interesting, set of research that Crowdflower has done as well. Kurt Boone, if you don't follow him on Twitter, you're missing out. Strongly recommend you follow him. He's this chief data scientist for Booz Allen. He asks whether data scientists could be better called data plumbers. If we're leaving so much of the work on their shoulders, and they're hard to get. I mean, I do know that there's a lot of universities that are putting out data science degrees now in order to get people trained on how to do modeling and things like that. But there's just a limited number of them, and they're hard to get and expensive. So if you can make them be focused more on the modeling side and less on the discovery and making good of data, that's a good step. So when we think about what CDOs are trying to do, the things that have really limited them in achieving, the business ends. And I think of those kind of being in three boxes: customer experience, how do I cross-sell, upsell, do things like that; business ecosystems. Increasingly, people are trying to make use of data that's coming from other sources. Just think of what's happening in healthcare right now, where data is needing to move between various business partners in order to solve COVID-19 and things like that. Clearly, we want to continue to optimize business processes, but I think the big emphasis is really moved to new business models. How do I use data? And there was a very interesting talk last night. I don't know what time the person was talking from Deutsche Bank. It looked very dark there, and it was one of the last talks of the day. But on new business models, how do I get a digital operating model, all those kind of stuff. And Jeannie Ross has done a great book recently with Martin Mocker on how do you think about digital from that perspective. And of course, she's from MIT, Suer. So, we look at the problems, we know about them. We've got siloed data still. We put in our systems separately. Sometimes the siloed systems don't even have good data in there. My friend, Alan Hackney, who was at the time the CIO at John Hancock, told me that he was stopping some of his source system improvements to understand what the analytical system needed so that they could actually drive process improvement. So sometimes we have to go back and actually change the data that's created in order to actually create improvement. Obviously, as data scientists get more steep in the businesses they're operating in, hopefully they can help there. We still have multiple views of customer. We need to fix that. We need to make data trustworthy. I was shocked at how people felt today in the CIO chat about where data was in terms of quality and data stewardship, and that it was still, even after all these years, immature. And then we need to integrate views of data so we can get these competitive new business models together. I mean, when we're competing like in retail against, and I heard them mentioned earlier, Stitch Fix, there's a great, I reviewed the book a little while ago, AI, Analytics, and New Machines for Harvard Business Review. They talk in there in Stitch Fix about how they figured out how to take all of their data and figure out what a person potentially want to buy. Now they have a human in there as well, but it's pretty amazing to think what they're able to do and how that will impact traditional retail. Now, Derek Strauss gave a phenomenal talk yesterday at the event, got me really thinking about a lot of things, but one of the things he talked about, which is interesting to go back to, because if we look at what we're trying to accomplish today, we're impacting, we're impacting the business because we've got new stakeholders who are coming in that we denied historically before the big data era, the ability to get at data. So historically, we've dealt with farmers, tourists, and operators, but now we want to help explorers who are trying to see what is the data got in it that I don't already know, or miners who need data in depth. And so this is requiring us to do a different kind of job in terms of how we use and process data and the stakeholders, as I said, that we're working for. I want to suggest, interestingly, that potentially we're entering a new era. And what I mean by that is as we move to self-service, citizen types of people, and as we move to increase data science, our old processes, kind of coming back to the stakeholders that Derek was talking about, aren't as well put together. I mean, we used to say, okay, we've got this data, we're going to go transform it, extract it, transform it, and then load it, and then we're going to stick it someplace, a data warehouse or a data lake, and then we'll fix that data, protect it, and do the data modeling. What I think we're going to see happen, and this is going to prevent what people were calling a data swamp for many years, is that data discovery and validation and prep will happen first, and then I'll go do all of the other things I've listed here. And so the data I'm bringing in will have a causal relationship with the model that I'm trying to create. And so I think we're moving into a world where we flip how those actions happen. And of course, we don't want to end up with this swamp of stuff that lacks metadata or other things in it. We want to have data that's actually useful to driving business outcomes. Now, obviously, and I'm giving a talk with Ann Kavokian tomorrow and with Michelle Dennedy, who are experts on the whole privacy area. And if you don't know, actually wrote Privacy by Design, which was mentioned several times in the event. But we've got this balance between governance and control and access. It's becoming more and more clear that we can't have German data seen by the French people, at least in terms of the personal identifiers in that information. So we've got to balance these things in today's world. And I know there's those who are suggesting, let's go create an Uber marketing database or data warehouse or whatever you want to call it. But the idea of doing that without governance and control is a problem. And so that's where all the things that the talks that have been going on in the session about data stewardship have been so valuable. Now, in terms of getting data, for many organizations, the data pipelines are kind of broken, as this graphic shows. So I want to talk a little bit about data pipelines, and I want to talk also about, how do you go about fixing them. A friend of mine has come up with this idea that there's kind of two sides to the data pipeline, left side, right side. The left side is dealing with pre-processed data or getting pre-processed data ready. So you source it, stage it, and process it. The right side is making it consumable and hopefully driving outcomes. An interesting way of thinking about it. But I want to also say that we still are, maybe trying to stick a square peg into a round hole, and we need a round hole. So a lot of the things we're trying to do are difficult when we look at the old ways of doing them. So, traditional approaches may not work, especially as more and more of this ends up somewhere in the cloud, whether it's private or public. So as I look at, challenges that CDOs are trying to work through, they probably cover this gamut. Ranging from how do I discover what's out there? How do I get it prepped in a way that's useful? How do I standardize my data flows? For many companies, the data flows I've been told by my friends in the CIO chat are like a Jenga tower ready to fall. So how do I standardize them and actually spend less time there and more time later down the pipeline? Other issues, obviously, improved data hygiene really matters. Forrester did a study several years ago where they suggested that data degrades at something like 10% per year. Now, it's not that you're using just old data, but obviously there are hygiene issues there. It's interesting, my friend, another interesting one to follow on Twitter, Dion Hinchcliffe, calls this whole thing I'm talking about to a degree data wrangling, which is kind of a cool term, because when you look at it, how do I get the hygiene improved? How do I make sure my quality is good? And then obviously we're, about 60% of what CDOs are doing is focused on, marketing-led initiatives. And so, getting to a single source of truth is really interesting here and important. And as well, we need to manage information risk and data stewardship. Really interesting book that came out last year. I did a review on it. You just look under my name and look for Competing in the Age of AI, and then you may want to end up getting the book and putting it on your bookshelf. So Marco and Karim, I believe is how you say his first name, was his co-author, who are both professors in the Harvard Business School, wrote a book called Competing in the Age of AI. And it was interesting how he thought about what the world we're ending up in. So, lots of sources. Kind of the most interesting thing is that third-party and edge sources are becoming increasingly part of the purview for CDOs, and that we need to publish and subscribe typically through APIs. And then what we're doing is we're impacting all of the things that we see above. I think none of us would disagree with that. I think the thing that we didn't talk enough about this week is this notion of digital applications. Jeannie Ross calls them digital offerings. Open Group calls them digital products, but increasingly data is going to be a product that people consume, probably, and it's going to impact business models. So, for example, GE's jet engine group doesn't sell jet engines anymore. And I did notice they were talking, what they're selling more and more often is a service that says, I'll keep the airplane flying, and they use the data across all of their jet engines to predict when they're going to have a failure, take out that jet engine for repair, and then put a new one up, completely revolutionizing how they're thinking. So data is not the end necessarily. It's potentially part of the journey. And even Deutsche Bank last night was talking about how they were being out-marketed by Alipay and things like that, instead of actually building increasingly digital applications. I took another chart from that book and just modified it slightly to suggest the following kind of data platform thinking. So, we've got all kinds of different data which have different natures to them that are coming into the system. Some of it's known in prep data, so I don't have to do anything with it. The data modelers can actually go and apply to that, what they need to do. So it's exposed via an API typically. They do their data modeling, and the digital products kind of come out the other end. On the other hand, there's data that's maybe not right away in the catalog that I need to discover. It can be unknown structured, unknown unstructured data, and then I need to run it through a data pipeline: gather, clean, normalize, integrate, and safeguard. To many respects, this data pipeline, if you think about it, is kind of fulfilling what Tom Davenport talks about in data defense. And so I've got to do a bunch of things to the data to make it ready for use. But I may do a little bit of testing of the data as a data modeler once I've discovered it, to validate that it has statistical significance to the models that I'm actually going and building. I remember one time doing a multivariate model and discovering piece by piece by looking at the correlations that certain factors in that multivariate model didn't make sense as part of the model. There wasn't a relationship strongly there. And then I brought it down to just a few things that I was using in that multivariate model. So, you know, data platform obviously is key to what we're doing. And again, I think it's great what they talked about in their book, and I tried to pick up most elements of it here. Now, in terms of, you know, business objectives and just, you know, this is kind of an introduction for us to many of you, because Boomi hasn't focused on you as an audience until this year. So we're thrilled to be here. And, you know, we try and go after all of the things you see above. So from governance, stewardship, and compliance to improved hygiene, to single source of truth, to building, you know, kind of an analytical driven organization. One of the things we've done over the last year, which is really interesting, is we started to apply AI to the process of making great, useful data. So, you know, the platform, which is really, in my mind, less of a platform, more of a single application, allows you with the same skills to basically move from the right hand to the left hand, or start anywhere in between that you need to do. So from catalog to prep, integrate, cleanse, master, govern, and steward. And a lot of this has been built as a new, radically different approach from what was done with on-premise software. And because in many cases the build time can be in the cloud and the runtime can be wherever you want it to be, that means that you can take advantage of the 11,000 customers that we have and what they've already built in terms of processes. So you don't have to rebuild things. If you want to connect Salesforce to SAP, it's been built 1,000 times. Just use one of those processes. Don't focus on it. And then we maintain the whole thing for you. So that's kind of a quick view of Boomi and how Boomi fits into the agenda of the CDO. And just one more thing, I threw this in just to kind of talk about, you know, what its advantages are. And then I'm going to come back to kind of a checklist for you of things to think about as you try and go and pursue your data agenda. So the first thing is we reduce the amount of time and effort to discover and evaluate data. As I said before, standardizing these flows is a big issue. So we're able to reduce the amount of time building data flows dramatically. We have one customer that, you know, and there's a case study on the website for it, that it was able to build its workflows in, you know, twice the number in 1/6 the time. And so what they were able to do is to go and rip off their old Band-Aids and build consistent processes for that. We make it faster to get a single view of key things that you're looking at, whether that be employees or customers or suppliers. And then we allow you to enrich that data. And then obviously stewardship needs some codification and improvement in it. So we allow you to do that. So as we look at it, and this is going to give us lots of time for questions, and hopefully you'll have plenty of those. When we look at the CDO agenda, we think that there's a variety of things that you need to consider. Obviously, it just depends on industry, but we do work with a lot of regulated industries. So, you know, some of these things I'm going to talk about will be really important to them. So the first thing is obviously you got to have data that's useful. I mean, I remember a statistic at a prior company that astonished me, that they found that people were doing the integration work 7 years before they were fixing the quality of data. I don't think that will stand today. I think you need quality data from the start. So build your integrations, but then build the data quality rules. And, you know, I'll tell you one thing I discovered several years ago that's amazing to me. I was talking to CFOs about data, and I was surprised how well they understood the data problems, but they were still doing their financial reporting, their end of quarter reporting by spreadsheet. And I asked them, why did they do that? Well, they said, we don't trust the quality of the data. And so, and we can't control the rules, IT controls the rules. So we do a manual extract of everything, and then we check the data and make sure we think it's correct. So we obviously, for a variety of businesses, need to let the data stewards, the business, control the data and the data rules. And when exceptions come up, they should be able to control it. Compliance is critical. So am I protecting data? Is it not getting out? And we live in a world where data can't get out. I heard the CIO of Target speak a few years ago, and he said, if we have another event comparable to what we've had in terms of a hack, we'll be out of business. So, you know, it's critical that you manage that whole process. And that of course starts with getting the business involved. I've talked to CIOs a lot about data stewardship, data governance. You're welcome to see what we talked about today on Twitter. But one of the key learnings I learned from them a long time ago is it won't succeed if it's the CDO doing it or the CIO doing it. You need absolutely the business involved or it's failure. Clearly, you want to get your data flows and the governance of those, and then obviously, you know, one of the more interesting things from a GDPR perspective that came out was the whole notion of the ability to you know, potentially, you know, erase a person from your records. How do you do that when you don't know where your data flows and who owns it, and that you're not consistently governing it as it goes from place to place to place? So that's a huge issue. Consolidate your data from multiple sources. We need, as this last one implies, a single source of truth to really improve it. I mean, it's amazing, you know, and Jeannie Ross talked about this in one of her early articles about what Nordstrom was able to do to beat out, you know, Stitch Fix and other people's like that, but really Amazon that was coming after them. Instead of just having the ability, I just did this on Amazon. I went to previous orders and ordered something, but a while back, I wanted another shirt of the same kind I ordered. It gave me a full fit one versus a trim fit. I didn't know enough to predict from my past thing that I wanted that. What Nordstrom's able to do is to predict from your past purchases what you might want, what was in the supply chain, whether regardless of channel, and drive out to you recommendations. This kind of intelligence is really where we're going. And so regardless of channel, so having the ability to get that single source of truth still really matters, and with data and hygiene in a place that is really more automated than it is today. So that's what I had planned for today. I was hoping, as I said, to give lots of time to discussion. Hopefully this has provoked some thoughts. And so I'm going to stop sharing and allow for our folks at MIT to tell me what questions you've asked.
Hey, Myles, just an FYI, we're just doing a check to remind anyone. The first question is, can you note the book again? Mike missed it. So can you mention that book again, Myles?
Yeah, the book is, and I'll see if I can even pull it down. I can show it right here, Competing in the Age of AI. Now it'll look a little different. This is the copy they give to a reviewer, but it's a great book. I think it's something that you may even be able to share with some of your business users. So it's a real good book for you to consider.
Great. While we wait for more questions, you'd mentioned data stewardship and data governance. So can you maybe talk about, you know, and obviously data literacy is important as well. Maybe you can talk about data stewardship to begin with while we just wait on more questions coming in.
Yeah, I mean, it's people and process first. You know, the technology matters. It's a way of codifying your process, but you have to go get executive sponsorship. One of the things, if you're thinking about putting data governance, and somebody warned me a little while ago, so I'm going to make another recommendation of place to go, but somebody warned me a little while ago that they were redoing their website. But the Data Governance Institute has a really nice 25-page quick read on how to establish your people and process side and get the sponsorship you need for all different aspects of data governance. And so really recommend, if you can find that and it's back up, to go get that. Otherwise, you can go bug my friend Gwen Thomas, who's the head of the Data Governance Institute, to go and get that stuff back up or to give it to you. And she is on Twitter. So, but that people and process thing, we have to get sponsorship. We have to have executive buy-in, and then we have to be able to go get those stewards established. And then with that, then we can use tooling to help us with any myriad of issues that you might do from a governance point of view.
Yeah, I mean, it's clear that we often talk about technology is only 10% of the solution. It's got to be people and process, and you got to have the right processes with the right people, and then use technology. We had another question come in there, Myles. Can you talk about the differences in CDO roles in public versus private sector?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of items there that are very similar, but there are differences. I mean, obviously, a lot of organizations who are on the edge of using technology in the private sector are trying to build analytical models and things like that. I think, from what I've seen at these events and from the folks I've talked to, a lot of what the public sector CDOs are trying to do is to get their data useful, especially in things like higher education when I talk to those folks. So it's really about the fundamentals of getting data useful. And to some degree, it's about data literacy, to come back to what you talked about earlier. You gotta get people understanding what they can do with data. But I do think over time, public sector is going to be, more leading edge. There are some places where we are seeing public sector being more on the leading edge, and some of it has to do with smart cities and things like that. What Palo Alto is doing, for example, up here in Northern California, is absolutely amazing, with street lights and things like that, where they're building predictive models and then involving others in it. So I think public sector is still doing the fundamentals of data defense, whereas private sector in many cases is leaped into building more sophisticated models. So that's just kind of my take, but love to hear what your thinking is.
Well, we've got another question coming up on that. So, and for anyone that's on the Slido, please go ahead and put your questions in there. We'll get them over to Myles. So it says, Myles, this person says, great presentation. Question, do you agree that the main factor of the lack of reliable data would be the lack of data culture in the actors in the process?
Oh yeah. Yeah, it is amazing. And that's why top leadership matters so much. I wrote an article a while back on the fact that we needed analytically driven CEOs. In fact, I'm working on a piece right now to try and be a primer to CEOs so that they understand what we're talking about. I mean, it is interesting. When I did my MBA, I ended up taking a lot of data science classes. I had to calculate them one time because I didn't realize how much I knew about modeling when I was running some modelers. But anybody who's got an MBA, and it's 40% of CEOs apparently, they did take statistics, and they did take some form of what was called operations research. So there should be hope that you can go, you remember in that class and you did a linear regression and maybe even learned what multivariate regression is, and you learned about, statistical things. I just want you to get that stuff going in your mind again. And now let's just talk about the data issues we have to cover and the data opportunities. But it's a big deal. And, this community, I think we're all focused on the same objective. How do we make people, capable of really understanding the potential with data? But I will tell you that if they don't get it, the risk is huge. So the year I was born, I will not share that, but I think Robert and I were born roughly around the same age years ago. The average age of a company was 55 years. A few years ago, that dropped to 20. And a year and a half ago was 12. So if they don't get this, they're going to be digitally disrupted. Data is a core and foundational capability. So hopefully they're starting to understand the risks and the opportunity. Otherwise, their company's at risk.
So just asking, just checking. Oh, we have another question coming in just on the wire here, and I do want to try and get to your obviously other topics of data governance, data literacy, but let me post this one into the chat so you can see that. Okay, I read that one out. So the word data is perceived as very technical in comparison with digital. Should we look into the title CDO? I'm assuming that would be Chief Digital Officer rather than Chief Data Officer. That's the way I assume I read that. Is that the way that you read it?
No, that's the way I read it, yeah. No, I mean, it is an interesting question. My friends that are Chief Digital Officers are using data, but they're also focused on how do they transform employee experience or customer experience, and data is a key role in that. I think the advantages that CDOs have had is that they get analytics at a level that the Chief Digital Officer may not. That's a hard question, but I do think there's an interesting question embedded in that, and that is it easier for people to understand, digital, because people are, they can pull up their phone and they can see, a list of apps and they kind of understand what that is. But data which powers those apps may be less understood. It's a really interesting question. I think the thing that really powers those apps increasingly is digital. Data. I'm sorry, let me say this right. And so I think increasingly there's going to be this opportunity, but maybe, and there's less of those Chief Digital Officers than there are Chief Data Officers out there from statistics. So I just think we have we need to educate people on data and what enriched data can do that's highly capable. And if we can do that, then we can transform our businesses. But I went back and I was looking at some research that a friend of mine who's come to these events before from Forrester, and a lot of what CDOs were having to do was data education. And so I don't think that's changed much in the last couple of years.
And we definitely want to, drive the term and even get the Chief Data Officer on the board, right? The board member of the data initiatives rather than digital. Digital has too many connotations. You can go, is it digital media? Is it digital signage? Is it, when you talk about data, you know what data is, right? So it's pure and simple. I will just do a quick check, but if not, if there's no other questions. Oh, so someone just confirmed that is exactly what I meant. So we were on the right track there. But Myles, can you maybe explain where you were thinking about on the data governance side of the house, which is always an interesting topic to hear from our sponsors and partners in the business?
Well, again, it's people and process. It's about getting stewards defined. That means you've got to have people identified in the business. From the discussions that I've had with CIOs and others, if your And it's the reason that CIOs for a long time didn't want to even own the thing. They now get the importance of it, but they didn't want to own data stewardship, which was part of the impetus for the CDO to evolve. What I will also say, in fairness, is that most of the CIOs I know do not have big data chops. So the need and for the CDO is kind of confirmed there as well. But CDOs need to really work with their key business stakeholders. If they can get the CEO, hopefully they work for one, to help them establish the importance of data, and the fact that people have to put time and calories in, then they've won half the battle. Then they have to put the processes in, get all the right questions asked. And it's interesting on the privacy side, my friend Michelle Dennedy will say, why did you need this identifying field in this particular app? And
Right.
until you have those data stewards, you can't start to ask those questions. Well, maybe this app really doesn't need that piece of personally identifiable information. And the more you can get rid of those things, the less risk you put yourself in. So there's lots of questions that need to be asked. The full gamut of governance needs to be asked. And that does include data quality and things like that. I was talking to somebody earlier today about arguments that they were having around what was, let's see, it was a university. So what's a student? How do you define that? You'd think those things were easy at the top of your mind. They would be easier, but we have to get the stakeholders defined so we can define what those things are.
So something you mentioned, which was the CDO reporting to the CEO. However, I'm sure you've seen that the CDO does tend to report to different titles. What's your take on that? Where should they land?
It depends on the organization a lot. There surely are cases where the CDO should be reporting to the CEO, but there may be other cases where it doesn't make sense. So let me throw out an example. There's usually somebody who called the Chief Medical Information Officer. And if there's a CDO, it probably makes sense for them to report in that person. They get data and they get the business problems that you're trying to solve. So it really depends on the industry where CDOs report, but I think the opportunity for organizations is huge for CDOs, in the sense that data really today is becoming what drives business. And so if you can get the business educated, if you can start to demonstrate results, and we heard this in multiple presentations here, but I have to agree with it over and over again. Pick some small projects that you can show value. This is the truth for anybody in technology, but in the CDO's case, you're being brought in to go and fix a business problem. So go find out what those big business problems are and cut off a piece and show your value. And if you do that and you really do achieve, real alignment with the business objectives of the company, then it really doesn't matter where you report, but you'll have a seat at the table regardless. And that's what you should have.
I think that I often come back to what Dr. Richard Wang says: start small, think big, move fast. Right? So, which is great words to live by. Maybe just one last area, and then we can obviously go to the town hall meeting. But there's been a lot of talk about obviously data being the new currency, and some people use analogies to oil, and data is the new oil. From your perspective, and there's a lot of talk about monetization of data. Where do you stand on your term for data's impact in the organization?
Well, a couple thoughts here. So the first one is that we do ourselves a disservice if we imply it's like the new gold or something like that. Oil's not bad because there's a refinement. All the work we're just talking about from a data governance perspective has to happen. So we need to make sure that people understand it. Now, I want to also stress, I'm going to go back to my friend Alan Hackney. You may not have good data. I mean, good data that you even want to show to anybody because you're not collecting the right data. So, you know, sometimes it's going to be, I have to go fix the process so I'm collecting the right data so I can actually improve. I think those things are important, but I think it's really critical that you start to have a dialogue about the business problems they're trying to solve. In that research I was talking about, CDOs, there was always an impetus that the CDO was brought in on. Go figure that out. That's the place the data is going to have the most value. There's some reason they brought you in. Hopefully it's not something where you're not going to be successful because it's a problem set nobody wanted to handle. Hopefully it's because there's a business problem you want to solve. Go solve that problem and then find the next one to solve. And if I could remember it perfectly, I would quote Rich Wang again, but I think he had it nailed.
Yes, start small, think big, move fast. Obviously, metrics. Are you a fan of identifying metrics from the CDO and the office of the CDO, helping them define metrics and having metrics to measure by?
I think the metrics that are going to be useful are going to be where you've set an improvement objective, you know, the percentage of data that's useful, and you do it as an over time kind of thing. So I think showing that, but I had a really interesting discussions with a bunch of CIOs a while back, and I think that this discussion matters equally to the CDO. I was asking them, you know, what should you be judged by? How, you know, is there some thing that you should be measured against? And I was astonished. They all came back, and this was like 20 or 30 CIOs. They all said we should be measured by the same thing as the CEOs measured, growth of the business. If you think about it, if CDOs are successful in making data-driven businesses, the business is going to expand. They're going to know where to put their attention. They're going to focus on those things, and they're going to grow their business. And some, you know, Stuart Bond gave the statistic about data-driven businesses yesterday. I don't remember the exact number, but it was something about how most of the growth that's happened out there during this crisis has happened for businesses that were already across the digital transom and were using data effectively. I think those are the things that are going to really matter in the end.
Well, there's a lot to get organizations from where they are today over to the other side of that digital divide, especially as the quality of data is still being addressed. I haven't actually seen the quality of data being addressed go down, yet we've got a plethora of new tools in the market to address that. Because I mean, would you obviously talk to the fact that data quality is kind of foundational in a lot of things that we're trying to go for: data governance, data stewardship, data literacy, machine learning, artificial intelligence. It is predicated on the fact that the quality of data has to be of a good enough quality. And what would that level be? Any thoughts on that, Myles?
Well, I'm going to go at it a little different because I think these statistics will be interesting to the audience. So Jeannie Ross did some research at MIT CSR, and what she found was that only 28% of the legacy businesses had transformed digitally. 72% hadn't. And when you looked at where their data situation was, 51% were in silos, and then the other 21% were in a situation where they had Band-Aids and duct tape and it wasn't very flexible, so it was hard to get data out. So, the aspiration for everybody on this particular thing should be to grow that pie of the 28% with their company name in there. We have to fix these fundamental blocking and tackling things, and then build models that are relevant if we're going to succeed.
And obviously, I'm assuming you'd be a fan of some kind of federated solution to mapping the data and pulling an integrated view of the data together, so therefore the business could then put on top of it its algorithms, its machine learning, its AI processes and data science on that side. So,
Yeah.
any thoughts?
No, I think I'm a fan of being able to put data together, put data across organizations. I think there's one other thing, and Tom Davenport talked about in one of his books about this, is that your objective should be to move from a bunch of data scientists and data people stretched across divisions to, unless your business model is one of a bunch of disconnected portfolio, but you should be moving that into one team that's centralized. It helps from the learning perspective, but it also helps because the business problems you should be dealing with should be more and more relevant. I'll throw out one example. So I went in and visited a couple of years ago this huge insurance company up in Canada. I will not mention their name. They weren't too far away from you though. And what they told me is they were worried about Google. And I said, well, what are you worried about Google for? And it was the first time I ever had the marketing people in the room with me in customer visits. And they said, well, we're worried about Google because Google's going to disintermediate us from our customers and show them the best, auto policies or life policies, et cetera. And they said, we have to have a single view of customer and then be able to use that information so that we can take and provide offers to people when they take a look at us before they go look at someplace else. And so if you think about it, in their case, coming back to your value of data question, it was get that single view of customer, build a predictive model, and then offer somebody automatically when they're looking at a different policy that was already a customer. But they couldn't do that. The fundamental systems were all put in by different groups. They all had their own separate systems. So, in that scenario, you immediately see the value of an integrated group looking at integrated business problems driven by the CDO. Regardless of where the CDO reports, they have to be pulled out of divisional work and matured, according to Tom, into an enterprise function.
You make a good point. I think that Michael Conlon was talking about that very subject of getting a enterprise view of the data in order to be able to make critical decisions. And if you don't get that, then you're in solid views, and you could lose against your competition. So, and again, a good point for the community that we're in, which is our data leaders, to kind of have to look at the global, the enterprise view rather than the siloed view, right? And whether you're in government, whether you're in industry, whatever sector you're in, it's important to have an enterprise view. Myles, what I'm going to do is I just checked. There's no other additional questions. I'm going to give you the final word on if people want to know more about Boomi and what you do and how do you get a hold of you, how would they do that?
Feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn, as well on Twitter, and obviously, feel free. I think my email's in the system, so feel free to reach out to me. Love to. I've had a couple people just say, "Hey, I don't even know who Boomi is." So we are part of the Dell family, and we actually mean Earth, even though we're a cloud company in terms of how a lot of this gets done. But we would love to have any discussions we can have with you all on your business problems and see where, if there's an opportunity to help you do something faster.
So just as an extension on that, so you mentioned that Boomi is part of the Dell family. So how's that relationship with Dell? Are you completely independent? Do you kind of have some kind of oversight from the mothership, or how does that relationship work between Dell and Boomi?
The main thing that Dell does is it decides, whether we get bonuses or not. Other than that, we run pretty well. I mean, they get to say, "Hey, we liked your numbers," or "We didn't like your numbers."
Right.
They're excited about us because they touch data in all other ways, and so the main thing we get to do is to coordinate with their sales forces and things like that. But otherwise, we run pretty independently. But we've got the strength of Dell. I mean, a lot of companies in the data area, as you know, are smaller, and you wonder, but how long they'll live and all that kind of stuff. I think we've got a real solid future to us, and as being part of the Dell family.
Well, we certainly look forward to hearing more from Boomi in the future. And for all our attendees, please make sure you reach out to Myles Suer at Boomi on Twitter and on email. And Myles, on behalf of the symposium, we would like to thank you for your time today, your gracious time today, and giving that up. I know there's been a lot of great content that has been provided. You've referenced several sessions that you yourself have attended. We have managed to sit through several sessions of great content, great speakers. So as the last speaker of my track, thank you very much indeed. It's been a long 3 days, but a worthwhile 3 days. And we certainly hope to see you back in the future.
In live next year.
Look forward to it. Thanks, Myles. I appreciate it. And thanks very much indeed.
Take care.